nice. Hey, there we go. Awesome. Good to see all of my amazing students here. Hello, amazing hackers on YouTube as well. Let me see that I have my audio settings set up correctly. Audio input should be good to go. Alright, today I'm not going to stretch it for too long because I'm a little bit sick myself still. I'm going to spare you the graphic details because Marius already got them and Marius was kind of grossed out and almost wanted to quit. So I'm not going to do that to you guys. Orgus, you're fired. Let's start off with that. And we're going to talk about the fantastic methodologies. Now, why do I want to talk about this so badly? Because I think this separates you from a normal ethical hacker, I should call it. It's hard to say normal, of course, because it's still an ethical hacker. But people who are ethical hacking, it's different than actual pen testing, of course. There's a lot that goes into pen testing that isn't really mentioned with ethical hacking itself. And one of the biggest things is documentation there. But what do you document? How do you proceed with a specific pen test? Well, those documentations, we've already gone over them in the deliverables. Today we're going to go over those methodologies. And this is where you score extra points on the CNWPP exam. This is important for me. Why is that so important for me? Because CNWPP is all about being able to lead your own team, about being able to start your own company. And if you have these methodologies down, then you probably have it down to start your own company. Now, I cannot spoon feed this to you. That's impossible. I'm not going to be able to do that. What can I do though? I can give you a large bird's eye overview, but it's up to you to dive deep and to actually read the full methodologies. You're gonna have to do that. You don't have a lot of a choice, I am afraid, because there are quite a few nuances that I cannot give you even in a span of 3 hours. What I would recommend is that you print this out, that you put it next to the shitter, or that you have some kind of ebook ready, e-reader ready next to the toilet, and when you're bored, you have some reading material for your viewing pleasures. Now, what I will do though is give you that overview, and we're going to get an overview of a few methodologies first, and you'll see that there are quite a few similarities between these methodologies, but also a few differences. And every methodology is going to have a situation in which it best applied. So we'll look at the specific applicability of a methodology as well as applying it actually, or at least describing how to apply it while I do that for YouTube. When I'm done with my descriptions, I'm going to switch over to Discord fully, because in Discord we will do exercises as we usually will, but I am going to talk first because I love talking and you guys love listening to my beautiful angel voice, of course. Let's talk about NIST 800-115 first. So in NIST 800-115, NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology, as you can imagine, this is something that is highly regarded. This is a huge document. So if you're ever wanting to fall asleep but you can't, I would recommend this as reading material. It starts off with the planning, as so many others do, and that scope definition is also important, not just in scope, but also what is out of scope. If the client doesn't specifically mention that, ask them, is there anything specific out of scope for your engagement? Then, according to NIST, you should identify your resources. What do we have here? Which servers, VoIP, etc. Can I ask the people in Discord to mute themselves for a moment, please? Thank you very much. And then we want to establish communication protocols. This is important if you do CNWPP. Do the proper communication protocols with your customer. Don't just send information in the... Can somebody from the admins please mute the person in Discord? It's quite distracting. Thank you. For that communication phase, what you need to remember there is that it needs to be very secure all of the time. This is annoying. Sorry about that. Guys, please mute yourself for a moment. There we go. So for that discovery phase, I'm still at that communication protocols. Darn it. So those communication protocols are really important to get right. As I said before, don't just share information on public channels. Don't do it in Discord. I like to do it very securely through password protected and usually a one-time link where they can click it once, they can download the report, and that's it. They cannot click that link again. That's how I like to communicate, with a predefined password that has been defined beforehand in a different communication channel than that same email that I am sending. When it comes to discovery, I'm going to use the public information as much as possible. Google, LinkedIn, any social media platform basically. And I want to use OSINT tools if I have them available, of course. When I find anything, it doesn't matter what it is, that even goes beforehand, we document that for later on. In this phase, the whole intention is you get an overview of everything first. So here you plan and then you discover. You don't engage with what you've discovered yet. And that is where a lot of hackers go wrong. They will directly want to engage with the target. I always see this happening. You don't do that. Normally you do discovery first. This is one of the phases of a pen test. And then you, in that discovery phase, try to make documentation that you can use for later. Then you start attacking. And what you've found, you're going to try to identify any potential threats in there. How I like to do it is through the discovery phase. I like to have a little bit of an Excel sheet, and Marius knows all about those darn Excel sheets, which have a list of every single endpoint with every single parameter, and I will look at them and I will judge them. What kind of potential threats in words can I find here? I also try to assess the potential impact of those threats, because I will not have unlimited time. I need to focus on certain threats. Then I document my threat model, and when I do that, of course, there is the actual assessment as well, the engagement with the target, and we start our reporting, where we're going to document any vulnerabilities we found. We're going to provide remediation details, and this is often forgotten, but in your report you should have those remediation details. The thing is, you are the security expert and you might think they are the developer, yes, but they are the developer. If they might implement a fix, it might not be completely up to par or standard, and they're still screwed. So it's important that they know exactly what they should fix. And then, of course, we're going to present our report to the client. If you have any questions, by the way, don't hesitate to ask them in the chat. We will look at that later as well. A little bit of a bigger one, PTES, one of my favorites though. Pen testing execution standard, I believe. It all starts with the pre-engagement again. You're going to define your scope and what is the goal of this pen test. That's important in PTES. What do you want to get out of it? You define that from the start. And again, you establish your communication protocols securely. Then for your intelligence gathering, once again, use public resources if you have available. Document your findings, threat model, do your vulnerability analysis. And here what they say as well is you can scan for vulnerabilities, validate what the scan has found, and prioritize those vulnerabilities. Then in the exploitation phase, we're going to actually try to exploit what was found. We're going to document the successful exploits and maintain ethical boundaries. That's important everywhere, of course, but they emphasize it here explicitly. Those ethical boundaries, of course, when you exploit, you're not going to exploit in production data with random data of people. You're going to try to make your own account and try to exploit that data. You're going to, if you get access to a server, not snoop around unnecessarily. Those are things that they made with maintaining your ethical boundaries. When it comes to post-exploitation, you want to determine the access level that you have gained and identify potential actions that can be determined from there on and document your findings. Then go on to the reporting again, where you document your vulnerabilities and, really important, provide those recommendations for remediation. Then you present that to your customer and hopefully you get paid at the end. Onwards to OWASP Web Security Testing Guide and OSSTMM. I've combined them into one in here. I was going to combine them all, but I didn't have enough time, so you guys are lucky. Otherwise, it would have looked like this spider web here, where OSSTMM is first of all about security management. You're going to define your boards, you're going to define any security controls on that. You're going to define your security policy, in other words. I hope that's clear. Then you're going to establish the roles and responsibilities. Who for this project, the pen testing project that is responsible for what. This is still your kind of pre-engagement information gathering phase, not even. Then you're going to implement security awareness training, because that is of course also important. Not only that you technically get things correct, but also on a human level. When it comes to risk management, OSSTMM recommends that you identify your assets, you assess the threats and vulnerabilities there, and you implement risk and mitigations. They also give an RAVV calculator, which is just a calculator telling you how secure you are according to OSSTMM. Then you do your security testing, where you conduct security audits, perform your pen test itself, and you implement security testing methodologies. Then you do your maintenance, because they don't only talk about security management, risk management, security testing, but also maintenance with monitoring, conducting periodic reviews of the entire system, and of course redoing the OSSTMM analysis and updating security measures where needed. For OWASP Web Security Testing Guide, this goes a lot deeper of course, but this handles every chapter technically. So you have information gathering, it starts there. Of course, OWASP Web Security Testing Guide is much more than just the exploit, but we're focusing a lot on that here. And it starts with info gathering, where we identify application entry points. Then that is of course your parameter gathering, your endpoint gathering. You're going to understand how the client works and identify how the server works. That's really important, because this is of course not really mentioned in the other steps yet, but it is also an important step to basically every pen test. Identify technologies, identify functionalities on both client and server side. Then for configuration and deployment management testing, you're going to test the network infrastructure. Then you're going to test the application platform itself and file extension handling for sensitive information. When it comes to identity management testing, you will test role definitions if you have users and they can belong to a specific group with a specific role, or just a role assigned to a user. That is a role definition, and you can test if that is accurate or not, either manually or through the help of different tools. Broken access control is also what it like to be called, and you're going to test the user registration process with the account provisioning process. So how do they give out account basically? Can anybody get an account? Do you have to have a special security clearance for an account? And if so, can you bypass that, etc.? Authentication testing comes next, where you're going to test for credential transport over encrypted channels. If anything is sent over HTTP, go kick developer in the nuts. Test for credential, by the way, don't do that, I don't want to set felons. Then you're going to test for default credentials. That's an easy one that I often like to do. default credentials are really like admin, test, and things like those are weak credentials, of course. But then you also have default credentials for hardware, for software. When it comes to the access control testing, here you're going to test for bypassing the access control schema. So this is more your broken access control with your horizontal privesc and your vertical privesc, aka BAC and IDOR. So IDOR is part of BAC, as you know, if you've been following my course and channel a little bit. That is why they are grouped together here. Then you're going to test if the user throws random shit at my application, how does it handle it, aka malicious input handling, aka reflected cross-site scripting, injections, different types of injections there. We have command injection, of course, SQL injection, we have HTML injection, we have email injection, CRLF injection, etc. So that is malicious input testing. And then we test for error handling, where we test for verbal error messages, aka do we see a error message that gives us a non-functional error message back, a stack trace, for example. Those are really useful for us, but we have to report them, of course. Then we test for fail open authentication mechanisms. Next up, we have web services. Here we're going to test for sensitive information sent through post, sensitive information in the URL, aka get, put, of course, as well, delete, etc. Testing for weak SSL and TLS ciphers or insufficient transport layer protection. Before we move on to AJAX testing, where we test for bypassing the JSON UTF-8 encoding and DOM-based cross-site scripting and AJAX fingerprinting, etc. I have to admit that is not the most knowledgeable topic in my head either, but that is why we have that beautiful web security testing guide. That's an overview of 4 very popular OWASP web security testing guides, and everybody has their own drive, their own spin to it, of course, and that is why we have this presentation right here. This is a presentation I like to sometimes use for customers as well, where we give them an overview of what a test will look like, where we say, let's start with day 1, what we're going to do in the beginning. Let's meet you. Let's see what you have to say, what your problems are, how we can determine the solutions for that, see if they fit within your budget, determine scope, NDAs, other deliverables, and initial high-level estimations can all be made in these initial meetings. That is before we start the whole process of the deliverables with the signed NDA and test plan on day 0, or at least at the start of the pen test, before the pen test is even starting. Then a little bit of a description of what the test plan will contain, but of course test plans are plenty online. I would like you to just use those, or just use one in the course that we have included. And then we send in that test plan, it gets reviewed, and we want that thing approved by our customer before we even do anything. After approval, we are going to notify the client of the time that we're going to test. So we will send them an email, and then we are going to get the IPs from which we are going to test, send those over, add in any tools, any other custom rules, etc. So the client should be fully informed. Then we're going to start testing. We'd like to use a custom header on every request, and I like you guys to do the same. If we give you the option to do that, I want you to do that, because if you don't take that option on the exam, you're forcing us to use a less secure option as a customer. Why is that? Very simple, because as a customer, we have a firewall, imagine. So just a very simple firewall. And now we're going to have to disable it fully, because you have your custom headers. You might be able to filter from IP, but in our scenario, we're not going to do that, of course. We're going to say, if you don't do that, then we will have to fully disable all firewalls at the moment of your test. Of course, we do not want that. We want to filter based on those custom headers. I know that there are other filter options available, but I'm an annoying customer at that moment. So make sure that you use that custom header where possible. Not only for this, also for logging, for tracing later on, for alerting. Those are important things that you can track with those custom headers. Then we follow the test plan and deliver on the coverage metrics that we have promised. And every day, every week, or every month we report on testing based on what is proposed. So let's say that we have a very short test, we will do it daily, of course. If you find something very important, report on it immediately. Don't wait until the next day. But again, use the established secure communication channels. What I usually say to my customers is not just OWASP Top 10, because I hear that a lot. I try to include OWASP Web Security Testing Guide, CWE Top 25, CWE Top Full List. There's a bunch of options that the customer can choose from, and I've sort of organized them into a very basic level, a medium, and a more advanced level. And then on one of the last days of testing, the client is going to receive a debrief from us and a detailed report with vulnerabilities, remediation steps, score, our own scoring a little bit, and a conclusion and a coverage report. Why is this really, really important to get right? Because while you're testing, if you find something, use a template, because then you can just copy and paste from your template into your report. It'll save you tons of time when writing that report. Believe me. Alright, and then a little bit of a facts, what the client will get, some facts about the pen test itself. So make sure that you understand that there are different methodologies, that you might have to even create your own methodology to a degree. I have included much more in here, of course, a little bit of an overview of those pen testing methodologies, and a little bit of an overview of OSSTMM, which I will cover still because I do think it's a very interesting topic. OSSTMM, Open Source Security Testing Methodology Manual. That's a mouthful, try saying that 10 times fast. So here we'll talk about what you have to know about this methodology, some operational security risks, trust analysis, and the workflow. So we'll start by defining what it is, and then show you a little bit step by step how you can perform it, but not fully, of course. We need you to do that yourself. Alright, there you go. So what you need to know, it's all about OPSEC here. So here we want to move the asset as far away from the threat as possible. What do we mean by that? We have a server, we have an attacker. We want to separate them as best as possible. That's what we mean by that. We want to try to neutralize any threat that might potentially be there, and we want to guarantee 100% security. If I say that, a lot of security engineers are going to laugh their ass off, because we all know that in practice that is near impossible. But still, OSSTMM, if you follow it completely to a bone, yeah, of course, if you can define every single hole, you can get 100% security. That is normal. But defining every hole, finding every security threat on that hole now and in the future is an impossible task. That's what I say about it. This is basically the contact between your asset and the outside world, which sometimes is required. And that has an entry point from the outside world to the inside world, the contact with that server. We call that a pore. This increases our porosity. So if you can imagine, if you have 50 ports open on a server, you have 50 pores. More pores, less secure. A pore can be set to visibility, so it is visible from the outside. Access, it can be accessed from the outside, or trust, it can be accessed from the outside with a trust relationship. This is through those various controls that a pore can be accessed. Are you still with me? So let's move to the 10 controls. These are what you need to know about these pores is that we apply controls on them. These are authentication, indemnification, which is a contract enforced between the asset and the interacting parties. Resilience, how strong is it if something does go wrong? Subjugation, which assures interaction can only occur according to the defined processes. And continuity, how will it perform? What's their uptime of this specific asset in the event of failure, of course? Again, we have the same. Sorry about that. Let's talk a little bit about the objectives versus the controls. So in the left column, you see the information assurance objectives, and we put the controls that we just saw as opposed to that. Now we missed one alarm, but we'll get to that later. When it comes to confidentiality, if we want to achieve that, we have the controls: confidentiality, privacy, authentication, and resilience. So if we want to up the confidentiality objective of our application or our test, we have to up the operational controls: confidentiality, privacy, authentication, and resilience. For integrity, we do that with integrity, non-repudiation, Jesus that word, and subjugation. For availability, of course, it's continuity, indemnification, and alarm. That alarm is just if something does go wrong, are we informed? Then we're not done yet. On those operational controls, we had limitations. So here we have the category in the left with the operations of the controls of Class A interactive controls and Class B process controls. And at the very bottom, we have anomalies. So when it comes to operations, through operational security, we have to take into account visibility, access, and trust, with the limitations for visibility of exposure and access and trust of vulnerability. Are you still following? Because this is quite, don't worry if you're not, just read the document. But the controls, we have those interactive controls and those process controls. So interactive, how when somebody interacts with your system, the limitation on that is a weakness. So we have authentication there, that's an interaction, indemnification as well, resilience, subjugation, and continuity. Class B process controls are non-repudiation, confidentiality, privacy, integrity, and alarm. And the limitation there is a concern limitation. People are concerned when something happens versus a weakness in your application versus a vulnerability or an exposure. Those are your limitations, or an anomaly. Does that make sense? I hope so, because goddamn, it does not to me. You have exposure once again. It does, by the way, but it's very, very confusing, and it took me a long time. For the limitation of exposure, you have the operational security of visibility. So if there is an exposure, it is through the operation visibility. If you have a vulnerability, if you speak about that limitation, it becomes through access or through trust. Somebody has access where they shouldn't have, or they have trust where they shouldn't have. That's a vulnerability according to OSSTMM. A weakness has anything to do with interactive controls. So authentication, that's a weakness. Indemnification, that's a weakness. Resilience, it's not strong enough if something goes wrong, that's weakness. Subjugation, that's weakness. Continuity, that's weakness. And then the concerns are those process controls: non-repudiation, confidentiality, privacy, integrity, and alarm. I kind of expect the people that I work with to know this to a degree. And not everybody, of course, but the people who want to lead a team who are at a higher level, they need to know this. They do. And it sounds silly, but I really do require this of my people. Because this methodology, while a little bit over the top sometimes, it is a very practical one. It is applicable in many situations. So they have to know for every hole we apply at max 10 controls to cover 4 limitations and bring the security up to 100%. I will show you a calculator of how that looks like. And we apply that, of course, to a snapshot of the current situation, and we need to reevaluate this on a regular basis. So, woo, that's quite a whiffy, isn't it? So you define your assets, your pores, your controls, and your limitations. Then you can define the areas around those assets. That's what you call your engagement zone. Everything around that zone is your scope, and the interaction of the scope with the world is the vector. Then you're going to define the equipment required. That are the channels, the test type you want to do, and the rules of engagement. I'm going to, for the scope, say that, like in this case, for the scope, this can include any physical components. So not just your software. It can also include like your software, your hardware, your voice, your VoIP devices. Your scope can include your entire zone, so everything from A to Z. It can be quite huge. Organizational wide scopes define every single piece of hardware and software that's running there. So as you can imagine, a test according to this can be quite expensive. Then you have certain channels as well. I will not bore you with those, the 4 processes. Again, I will not bore you over there with the trifecta either. I just think it's important that at the very beginning that you have an idea of that 100% thing. Where does that come from? Well, if we look at the RAV calculator that's included in the course material, we can very clearly see through OPSEC we have, remember, visibility, access, and trust with a porosity of 9. We have in total 9 assets with, or 9 pores for OPSEC. So if we increase this and we go to 10 for access, we have 16 OPSEC controls in total with a porosity of 16, as you can see. With some controls here, the class A, and remember, interactive. Those are authentication, indemnification, resilience, subjugation. So we have controls where we need 16 more authentication controls, 12 more indemnification, resilience. What this is this is just a representation in Excel of what we just saw in that little table of ours. And here we have how many ports are still missing, or security controls, I should say. These are all security controls. These are our ports that we have open. And then we know how many we still have missing, how many we have covered as a percentage, and how many we have missing. True control, full control, true coverage A, true coverage B. So if we have 16 here, we can get to 20% with a total coverage. Limitations, a security delta, and a true protection grade. I know this is very, very confusing, and you don't have to know this by heart. Of course, I don't know this shit by heart either, dude. What the fuck, do you think I'm a freak or something? No, well, I am a freak, but not because of this reason. But it's really important that you are at least aware of this, that you're able to understand this, and that you don't have to read this just before you start your engagement, of course. So people who do this automatically have a bit of a plus in my book. When it comes to OWASP, I'm going to go over OWASP as well, because I think it's important to note that it's much more than just the top 10. A lot of people think OWASP top 10 when they hear OWASP, but they are so much more than that. OWASP has the Web Security Testing Guide, which describes a few principles of testing, such as there is no silver bullet, as in no single scanner or firewall can save you. You will need a multitude of solutions all working together to provide the optimal solution, and that usually isn't even 100% waterproof. Stop like I know I wasn't saying goodnight to you guys. You guys still have to work for me. So they also say think strategically, not tactically. Don't apply patches. Find the root cause. We all know that the time between exploit found and patch developed is insufficient. Above all, not all users will even apply a patch if they see it. We also know that one of the principles of testing is the software development lifecycle is king, according to Web Security Testing Guide from OWASP. We want to use a secure software development lifecycle framework, but of course this requires you to have at least some business knowledge already. What is a software development lifecycle? If you develop software in a bigger business, it often goes through a phase of analysis, a phase of planning, a phase of development, a phase of testing, a phase of redevelopment, a phase of retesting, a phase of UAT testing. There are different phases in a production life cycle, and it's important that you understand that a little bit. But of course, I don't have enough time to teach you that here. Test early and often. The earlier a bug is detected, the easier and cheaper it is to fix. Also means to test documentation where possible. You also really want to understand the scope properly and develop the right mindset. That's important. You want to think outside of the box. Duh, of course, you might be thinking, but thinking outside the box isn't always that easy. You really want to understand the subject you have in front of you. Of course, how can you think outside of the box? First, you know how to think inside of the box. Use your application as a normal application, as a normal hacker, a normal user would, and then you can start thinking of outside of the box or hacker ways to use it. And of course, you want to use the correct tools. My dad is a construction worker. If he brings the wrong tools to the construction site, he's fucked because it's taking him much longer. He might not even be able to get the job done. It's the same for us. We can do everything manually as well. You guys know that I hate automation. Well, not for this. Of course, not for this. Man and automation go hand in hand. The devil is also in the details. I think we all know that. If we have a source code, we want to use it, of course, and we want to use proper metrics for testing. We want to know, is our security improving or not? Here in Belgium, they always say meten is weten, and I totally agree with that. You have to measure things to understand how you're performing on a security level and also on a testing level itself. Document your results. That is, of course, something I don't have to explain to you guys anymore, I hope. As for the testing techniques, they know different testing techniques, being manual inspections and reviews, threat modeling, code reviews, and pen testing. We'll go deeper into each topic. So manual inspections and reviews, they contain code reviews, for example, but also architectural reviews, documentation reviews, secure code guidelines, security requirements, and architectural designs. Reviewing, inspecting those. There are some advantages and disadvantages. There's no supporting technology required because it's just opening a file and reading it. But this can also be applied in a variety of situations, because as we saw before, it's not just a file, it's also architecture, it's documentation, etc. It's very flexible and it promotes teamwork, and it can be done very early because the code doesn't even have to be deployed yet, but it can be very time consuming and we don't always have the material required to perform this type of test. This also requires significant human thought and skill to be effective, very skilled if you want to do code reviews, in my opinion, because it's so easy to miss something, and especially because it can be hidden very deep within an application. If you have a pull request with 50 files in it on a Friday evening, I can guarantee you that not everybody is going to be as a teacher and do it right away. When it comes to threat modeling, we want to decompose the application and we want to use the process of manual inspection. We want to go through the application, understand what it does, and then we want to see if we can hack it. We want to look at the functionalities and the connectivity, and then we want to define and classify those. We want to classify the assets into tangible and intangible assets and rank them according to business importance. Then we want to explore potential vulnerabilities on them, either technical, operational, managerial, business, etc. You can fill in that list yourself. Threat modeling appears as well when we, the next step, of course, is to explore potential threats ourselves with a realistic view of the potential attack vectors from an attacker's perspective. This also means, of course, that we're not going to treat this as if we always have internal access. Not every test is going to go like that, and we want to create mitigation strategies for things that we have found and threats that deem to be realistic. The advantage here is that it is practical from the attacker's view of the system. It is not only from the internal view, it is flexible. We don't have to actively engage for this, and it can be done again very early in the software development life cycle. The disadvantage is, though, is that it's relatively new technique, so it's not as well documented, and good threat models don't automatically mean good software, though that correlation is sometimes made. Source code review, on the other hand, this is very specific. We're looking for these types of issues. I've listed them a little bit, but there are so many more that we can look for, and it's important to have your checklist, but also to just read the code and understand it fully. We're looking for concurrency problems, business logic flaws, access control problems, cryptography weaknesses, backdoors, Trojan horses, Easter eggs, time bombs, logic bombs. Those are, of course, little pieces of code that are hidden deep within the code and that might produce undesirable results, either when certain logic is triggered that might be out of reach out of most of the application users, but sometimes it's triggered, or after a specific period of time. It has its advantages because it is complete and effective. It can be extremely accurate and fast if you have competent reviewers, but this requires such a high level of skill that it's incredible. You can miss issues very easily in compiled libraries that are included as well, and we cannot detect runtime errors because the code is not running. The source code actually deployed might also differ from the one being analyzed. You never know, because you might analyze the development branch, but they might decide to push another branch to production. Who knows? Then we have pen testing itself. Of course, this is what I like, the active engagement. We're going to test after software has been developed. This is running, this is deployed code, and this can be a good addition, but only pen testing can be an issue. It's not good enough. You should try to combine multiple techniques and preferably all of them to get the best results. This can be fast and therefore it can be cheaper, relatively cheaper, because it's still quite expensive. It requires a relatively lower skill set than source code review, for example, than threat modeling. I'm talking about those things because it's active engagement. Doesn't mean it requires a low skill set, it's just a little bit lower. And this is going to test the code that is exposed and deployed. We know that. And then this is some disadvantages to this as well, of course, such as it being too late in the software development lifecycle, and we can only do front impact testing only. When it comes to setting up security requirements, we have different ways of setting them up. Let's talk about functional security requirements first. These are function-driven designs. They're security focused. Here are some examples. For example, we need to mask credit card data in the front end. Functionality there's credit card data needs to be masked in the front end. Very function driven. Another one is requiring multi-factor authentication on registrations. It's a functionality that we're going to describe there. And we do not want to allow weak passwords. We're aiming at the password functionality, password checking functionality, of course. When it comes to risk-driven security requirements, we want to test some negative test cases. So when the user throws in a cross-site scripting attack vector, it needs to block it. Malicious code should not be accepted. Here we talk about threat trees and attack libraries. Again, with that threat modeling, we also saw that a little bit. Use case security requirements are what they say use case for as a blah blah blah, when blah blah blah, I want blah blah blah. We really want to talk about a functional scenario, negative scenario, functional and negative scenario with misuses, and we want to elicit security requirements from that. So that was the OWASP Web Security Testing Framework. Let me see if there are questions so far. Let's see here. Thanks, Uncle. Oh, my pleasure, Brian. Thank you so much for joining. Uncle, yes, that will definitely become public. And my friends, for everybody who's watching this long, mad respect, because you guys know what this shit is all about. It's not just about testing, it's about the real stuff. And this is for me the real stuff. I'm sorry, it might sound cheesy, but I'm a rat. What are you gonna do about it? Let's talk about PTES, shall we? Alright, PTES. I'm just going to talk about an introduction to scoping. What is scoping? You're going to determine what to test and what not to test, making sure that both parties agree. So you need to explain what you're going to test. Just putting it in a document is not good enough. The scope needs to verbally also be explained and agreed upon by both parties with signatures in the test plan. Set a time and reach limitations on an assignment as well if needed. So we need this done by, or we need this done in the week of, or we need this done, etc. Not how to test this yet, just what to test, of course. Why we do that? Because we want to prevent scope creep. Oh, can you also test this? Can you also test this? It's not just, hey, stop. It's not just the legal reasons. It's also scope creep that is a big problem, because right now you don't get paid until you have finished your contract. And if you let scope be added to your contract on and on and on and on, then you're not going to be paid for a very long time. This is going to prevent unsatisfied customers because they know exactly what you're going to test through that scope. Some key components here are you're going to outline how your testers are going to spend their time. Imagine a customer wants to have 50 endpoints tested for 500K. The customer wants to offer 10K per endpoint in this case, so 50 endpoints, 500K, 10K each. A pitfall here is that the cost does not decrease linearly. That means that adding a single endpoint does not mean adding 10K. Key component here is you need to judge at scale if you can even out the business impact. Otherwise, you're going to judge per work item, and that's not the good way to work here. You need to take full scope into account. 10 business critical endpoints might cost $250,000, which is 25K each instead of 10K, because they might be massive endpoints. That is what I'm getting at. Every endpoint should individually be judged, and you cannot make that linear distinction. I'm taking 160 endpoints. I am doing, let's say, $1,000 per endpoint. No, you have to judge. Maybe I have 10 endpoints of critical. I have 50 endpoints of level medium, and I have 100 endpoints of level low. Then I can make a proper price. That's a difference than if I have 160 blank endpoints. I hope that's clear, because it's a very important thing, that scoping. There are many aspects that go into it, such as the type of test, the amount of work items, the size per work item, the business impact of those work items, legal coverage of those work items, the technical difficulty of the test. Because yes, sometimes you need to work through a VPN. Well, if you need to work through a VPN, cloud tools are always impossible, because you can never connect those darn tools through a VPN. That's going to make it more difficult. If you need special authentication mechanisms, going to make it more difficult. If you need to add special headers, going to make it more difficult. Scoping is fucking key. So how do I do it? Start one, you make a new Excel document. You list all of your work items. This can be IPs, endpoints, domains, parameters, as detailed as possible. You note down the estimation of business impact. I don't have it on here, but you also note down any assumptions. Note down what type of exploits we expect most per endpoint. Estimate the technical requirements per test. Estimate the amount of hours you're going to need to cover that work item and add up your estimations. High-level estimations plus budget are going to be your outcome. I told you I want to lead to your own company, and I fucking mean it. I really do. These here are some questionnaires that you can ask your customer about specific types of tests, and these will help guide your test with less technical difficulty. Everything will be clear up front, so I hope that these can be a little bit of help for you. We also have intelligence gathering. That is also a step in PTES that we love here at the thexssrat. And in intelligence gathering, we have different levels of intelligence gathering. Level 1 being the compliance-driven, mainly automated intelligence gathering. Level 2 being the best practice level. It's distilled from level 1, and it requires some business understanding. With level 3 on the other hand, being the state-sponsored level, nation-state level, much more advanced, and this is distilled from 1 and 2. So what is this? You're going to perform recon, gather information here as much as possible, of course. But why? We need to determine all of those entry points. We need to make that into a document. We need to have all of the information available before we attack. And what is this not? Is it may never be accurate or even timely. This is important to take into account. What do we mean by that? The things you find might be outdated. They might not be accurate anymore. So you always have to take that into account. When you do target selection, we have to name and identify all of our targets with all the auxiliary top-level domains and their branches. And we need to consider target limitations that are put on. Also, the length of the test and the end goal of the test is important. OSINT comes into play when we need to do passive information gathering or semi-passive or active. Now, what's the difference there? We have different levels. Remember, well, it was a while back. We have the levels of information gathering right here. So compliance, business, and nation state. If we go back to the slides that we were, for one moment please. On corporate level, there we see those levels come back. So level 1, physical, your locations, perseverance, relationships. This is OSINT on corporate level. Your logical level, that's spread over level 1 and 3. 1 to 3, of course. Your electronic level over level 1 to 2. Your infrastructure assets over level 1 to 2, etc. On the individual level, covert gathering on or offsite, footprinting. What do we have available here in our application? Internal footprinting, external footprinting through whois lookup, through port scanning, through banner enumeration, internal footprinting through packet sniffing, through void monitoring, through installing bug devices if you have to. Identifying the protection mechanisms. These are all different steps to your intelligence gathering, and here we do this on a network basis, on a host basis, on an application basis, on storage basis, and on user protection level. On all of these levels we have to determine our protection mechanisms. What is a protection mechanism? A protection mechanism is just something that the developers build, a security mechanism. That's what you can also look at as. You have to list all of this up, and then you have your complete intelligence gathering, and you can move on to the next step. Now that is quite the blah blah blah. It's been about an hour now. I'm going to close off the YouTube stream. This will be available later on, of course, and I'm going to go onwards to my students. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate your time. You have been awesome, and I will see you later, ladies and gentlemen.